Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Inside Number 9, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story begins with a woman named Rebecca, and today is her engagement party, held at her father's old Number 9 estate. As the guests gather, they begin a traditional game of sardines, which is like hide and seek. But when you find someone, you hide with them in the same spot until the last person finds you. Rebecca starts her search in the house. No one in the bathroom, no one under the bed, and soon enough, she finds the first person hiding in the closet. The man introduces himself as the IT guy at her fiancé's company, albeit in a different department, though they occasionally cross paths. He mistakenly calls her Rachel, to which she corrects him. As they engage in awkward small talk, another guest, a young man, briefly searches the room and leaves. Stuck in the closet, they continue their strained conversation. The IT guy asks Rebecca when her wedding date is, and she answers November 9th. The IT guy comments that it's a bad choice because it's the anniversary of 9/11, leaving Rebecca speechless. He then jokes that his own name, RIP, is unfortunate, short for rest in peace. Just then, someone else finds them. It's Rebecca's brother, Carl. The IT guy remarks that he must be familiar with the place since he found them so quickly. Carl laughs, saying he spent many a Christmas hiding in various closets, waiting for his little sister to find him, though she rarely did. Rebecca cuts his smelly bullshit off, urging him to join them in hiding. The three begin chatting. Carl mentions that their father is currently giving guests, Mark and his wife, a tour of the stables. Annoyed, Rebecca asks why they aren't playing the game like everyone else. Carl reminds them to keep their voices down to avoid being found. Another guest arrives, quickly discovering the three hiding in the closet. The man, Stuart, is Carl's boyfriend, and it's evident they've had some disagreement. After a brief exchange, Carl tries to leave, but Rebecca forces him to stay. Stuart begins gossiping about the guests, mentioning one man whose smell is unbearable. Rebecca realizes he must mean Stinky John and recalls they went to school together. She explains that John went through something that made him suddenly stop bathing. Stuart, realizing he's gone too far, changes the subject, asking about an elderly woman he saw wandering around. Rebecca explains it's her father's cleaner, who was supposed to be serving drinks. However, the cleaner showed up dressed as a guest, and Rebecca didn't have the heart to tell her otherwise. Just then, another person joins them, a somewhat dim-witted young woman who shouts upon opening the closet, alerting everyone to their hiding spot. They hurriedly shush her and pull her inside. As it turns out, the girl is actually named Rachel, the ex-girlfriend of Rebecca's fiancé. Awkwardly, the IT guy says that Rebecca's fiancé, Jeremy, often talks about her, which piques the interest of both Rachel and Rebecca. Stuart tries to change the subject, but Carl stops him. Rebecca, unwilling to let it go, presses the IT guy to reveal what Jeremy has said about her. The IT guy admits it was nothing flattering, just some general complaints about a girlfriend. With one pressing and the other answering, this uncomfortable exchange finally ends. Rachel, unable to take the stifling atmosphere, pushes open the closet door with the IT guy soon following. Stuart, desperate for the bathroom, opens the door, only to find the cleaner Rebecca just described inside. The woman came out of the bathroom, mentioning that she overheard their conversation from inside the closet earlier and didn't want to interrupt them. Then, the cleaner turned to Rachel, commenting on her dress, calling it sexy. Rachel thanked her, unaware the comment was actually sarcastic, aimed at the dress's color. The IT guy suggested they return to the closet. At that moment, the cleaner asked Rachel how she met Jeremy. Rebecca chimed in, explaining that Rachel was Jeremy's ex-girlfriend. Rachel added that they're just friends now and only text occasionally. Rebecca, trying to save face, muttered that Jeremy often texts her too, though it was obvious she was insecure about it. After an awkward silence, the older woman sighed, saying it had been years since she'd been in this room since it's usually locked. Rebecca interrupted her, but the woman, unfazed, began humming a tune. Carl avoided his sister's reaching hand, and just then, Stuart returned from the bathroom, stretching out his arm for Carl to smell the freshly washed scent, which Carl found a bit off-putting. The older woman then started chatting with the IT guy, asking if he had a girlfriend, hinting that he seemed to like Rachel. Rachel mentioned her boyfriend was downstairs. There was more noise outside. It was Mark and his wife. The wife wanted to leave, but her husband had an agenda. He needed to use Rebecca's father to get close to someone who could help him with a merger. For now, they had to stay patient. The couple started getting intimate and smelly in the host's bedroom, shocking everyone in the closet. The cleaner let out a squeal, which made the couple immediately sit up. Mark opened the closet with the IT guy greeting him first. Rebecca quickly added that the door was thick and they didn't hear anything. The wife wanted to leave, but Mark pulled her sexy body into the closet. He placed her next to Rebecca but mistakenly called her Rachel. Rebecca made a self-deprecating joke about how no one at her engagement party seemed to remember her name. The closet door hadn't even closed when Rachel's pale boyfriend came in, having heard the commotion but initially missing them. Rachel introduced everyone in the closet to him, and when she got to the older woman, Rachel's boyfriend naturally handed her his glass, asking her to refill it. The older woman asked why he was always being ordered around, to which he responded that because Rebecca said she was the one serving drinks. Rebecca, embarrassed, quietly explained that everyone was a guest and equal. The older woman then shared that she used to be the housekeeper for the 3 siblings who grew up here. Rachel, shocked, asked about this third sibling. Rebecca admitted she and her brother had an older sister who couldn't attend due to the distance. Stuart, feeling cramped, decided to join Rachel's boyfriend under the bed, with Mark as the boss, ordering the IT guy to step out of the closet to make more room. Frustrated, Rebecca watched as the group ignored the rules of the game. The IT guy ended up hiding in the bathroom, while under the bed, Stuart and Rachel's boyfriend struck up a conversation, breaking the silence. At that moment, the infamous Stinky John arrived, heading straight for the closet. Everyone inside cringed at his smell and refused to let him in. Carl hinted that there was space under the bed, but John was rejected there too. With no other choice, John headed behind the curtain, though he was barely hidden before Rebecca's fiancé, Jeremy, arrived. John, without hesitation, revealed everyone's hiding spots. Through the closet, Jeremy explained he needed to go to the station to pick up the last guest, as he couldn't find his own car keys and needed to use Rebecca's car. He absent-mindedly called her Rachel before quickly correcting himself. The group inside remained silent in exasperation. At that moment, Rebecca's father, Andrew, entered, and Jeremy immediately revealed where everyone was hiding. Angered, Andrew reminded them that this wasn't proper hide-and-seek. They were supposed to all hide together. With that, Andrew pushed everyone outside and locked them back into the closet. Rachel's boyfriend took a picture as a keepsake, while Jeremy tried to explain his slip of the tongue to his fiancée, as the others felt they were suffocating, thanks especially to John's hormone odor. Despite the cramped space, Mark still attempted to butter up Andrew, discussing the merger, which Andrew quickly saw through. Rebecca, now hurt, asked her fiancé if he still had feelings for his ex-girlfriend Rachel. Jeremy's silence cut deeply, and she turned to her father, reminiscing about their family's old sardine games. As she spoke, her father started singing the sardine song. After a moment of silence, the older woman began recounting an old story. Rebecca mumbled that it was something that happened a long time ago. But the older woman continued, saying that once a child had called the police, ruining an event completely. She asked if John remembered the boy's name. The old man seemed reluctant to pursue the topic further, mentioning that the boy's family had moved to Spain. At that moment, Rachel's boyfriend noticed that the IT guy was missing. Jeremy recalled that he was originally supposed to pick the IT guy up from the station, while Mark, deeper in the closet, reminded them that the bespectacled, boring guy was in the bathroom. Meanwhile, someone quietly locked the closet door from the outside, and the IT guy began singing the sardine song. He was preparing to end it all here with a big fire. And with that, the story concluded. By the end, we realized this was a tale of revenge. Andrew, who is Rebecca and Carl's father, harbored a dark secret. Many years ago, he held a scout gathering under the guise of teaching basic hygiene. During this event, he took advantage of the young boys by bathing them, committing despicable acts. Among the victims were John, the IT guy, and Andrew's own son, Carl. So within this short story, how many secrets were hidden? Let's break down the characters briefly. Starting with the victim, who was the IT guy. He was the first to hide in the closet and set up this trap. Pretending to be the groom's colleague, he often made awkward comments which everyone found dull, but in hindsight, his words held more significance. His remarks, like telling Rebecca, "This will be a long game," subtly hinted at the upcoming drama. He frequently misnamed Rebecca as Rachel, mentioned her wedding date November 9th as an unlucky 9/11ths, and even pointed out that his name abbreviated to RIP, all of which were foreshadowing. Later in the story, the conversations between the older woman and Carl revealed that the young IT guy had once tried to report the perpetrator, Andrew, but Andrew had silenced him with money, eventually forcing the IT guy's family to relocate. Unlike the IT guy, the naive John, who was also a victim of abuse, never spoke out. Traumatized, he developed severe psychological issues, stopped bathing, and distanced himself from others, earning the nickname Stinky John. Carl, Andrew's son, also endured his father's abuse. He exhibited anger, anxiety, and detachment from his sister, all signs of unresolved trauma. In the sardine game, when Carl found his sister, he mentioned that he used to hide in the closet and Rebecca could never find him, indicating his disappointment in her for not supporting him. When others came in to catch their breath, Rebecca asked her brother why he seemed so nervous, suggesting that this room was a painful reminder of his past. Carl's aversion to the smell of soap in the bathroom and his discomfort with his boyfriend's affection were subtle cues about his trauma. Besides these three, another potential victim emerged in the dialogue. There were their older sister's sons. The older woman deliberately mentioned that Andrew's family consisted of 3 siblings, including an older sister who had sons. The fact that the older sister didn't attend Rebecca's engagement with her children hinted that she had distanced herself from the place entirely to protect her own kids. The perpetrator in the story is undoubtedly the old man, Andrew, whose actions towards several children were despicable. From the start, his presence is suffocating as he forces everyone to play by his rules. Compared to this obvious villain, there's also a more insidious one, the cleaner. Her sharp and cutting words suggest that she knows the family's dark secrets and perhaps was even complicit. This awareness of past scandals gives her a sense of superiority, which she uses to raise her status subtly, no longer seeing herself merely as a servant. There's even a hint that she might have acted as a lookout back then. For example, when Mark and his wife were intimate in the master bedroom, the people hiding in the closet were unsure how to interrupt them until the cleaner called out. It's quite possible she once played a similar role for Andrew, acting as a lookout. Her hostile remarks toward Rachel likely stemmed from resentment towards Rachel's boyfriend, who treated her as a servant, stirring up her discontent. Then there's Rebecca, a silent observer and the most obedient to her father's rules. She's aware of what her father did and knows her brother suffered, yet she never stood up for him. Throughout the story, she is repeatedly called the wrong name, and no one at her engagement party seems to genuinely care about her. Confronted with these frustrations, she forces herself to wear a nervous, unnatural smile, a consequence of the lack of attention she received from her father as a child. As shown in the beginning, Rebecca enjoys the scent of soap, a smell her brother Carl despises because it reminds him of the baths their father forced on him, a privilege Rebecca never had. As a young child, unaware of the darker implications, she simply felt neglected, always seeking her father's approval. Over time, she became so accustomed to obeying him that even after understanding what he had done to her brother, she continued to play the obedient daughter to maintain her father's attention. This dynamic also explains Carl's sarcasm and distance from her. Among those not directly linked to the past is Carl's partner, Stuart. If Stuart previously didn't understand why Carl was cold and uncomfortable with physical affection, he certainly does by the end. Trapped in the closet with everyone else, hearing Carl's conversation with his father, Stuart realizes Carl's pain but still chooses to deflect with jokes, showing a degree of emotional coldness. Then there's Rebecca's fiancé, Jeremy, who doesn't truly love her, a fact everyone seems aware of. Why are they engaged? It's likely due to the influence and power of her father. Jeremy maintains contact with his ex-girlfriend Rachel, which might explain why he couldn't find his car keys when he needed to pick up a friend. Here's a theory. Maybe he lost them while engaging in some illicit activity with Rachel. Rachel and her boyfriend appear a bit dim-witted. Rachel's continued involvement with Rebecca's fiancé and hints of boundary-crossing behaviors are implied in the story. Mark and his wife each had their own agenda. The wife wanted to leave, but her husband insisted on staying to curry favor with the old man, Andrew. Mark's wife was on the verge of suffocating in the closet, yet her husband remained indifferent. In the end, the closet was filled with people, some violent, some complicit, some indifferent, some motivated by personal gain, some submissive, and of course, a few ignorant bystanders. Ultimately, all the evil was erased by a single fire. In seeking revenge this way, the IT guy who orchestrated it ultimately became an evildoer himself. The second story begins with a man preparing to dine alone at night. Suddenly, 2 burglars, one fat and one thin, appear in the garden behind him. The fat burglar tries to break a motion sensor light with a broom, but his fumbling fails, and the thin burglar quickly shoves him out of the way. The wealthy homeowner, sensing something amiss, opens the door to investigate. Meanwhile, the thin burglar sneaks in through another door, heading straight for their target, a valuable painting. But before he can act, the homeowner finds nothing unusual and returns inside. The burglars take out a prepared bottle of chloroform, ready to make their move. At the critical moment, the fat burglar's voice comes over the earpiece, asking if he's made it inside. As expected, there's always one fool paired with a slightly smarter sidekick. After replying, the thin burglar seizes his chance and moves closer to the target. But then his phone chimes with another message asking if he remembered to silence it. The scene shifts as the thin burglar opens the door to let his partner in. It turns out the homeowner has gone to the bathroom, prompting the fat burglar to ask if he's in for a quick or long one, needing to gauge how much time they have. The thin burglar retorts that it won't take 10 minutes, maybe 3 at most. Hearing sounds of digestive distress from the bathroom, they conclude that the homeowner might take a while and they begin their operation. They spot the painting they aim to steal, but the fat burglar hesitates. Just then, there's a noise from the kitchen. The fat burglar goes to check it out while the thin burglar removes the painting. It turns out the housemaid is in the kitchen preparing food. Unexpectedly, the family dog notices the intruders and the fat burglar panics, though luckily, the machine noise from the maid's tasks masks the dog's barking. The dog runs and barks its shit off while the fat burglar tries to lure it with bread, only to attract an even larger dog from the garden. After a chaotic scuffle, the fat burglar tries to toss the little dog outside but accidentally throws it into a glass door. Unfortunately, the poor dog's time is up. The thin burglar instructs his partner to dispose of the body. Things take an even darker turn after that as they hurry up their art swap operation. But just then, a blonde woman descends the stairs. The fat burglar is watching the maid while the thin one hastily rehangs the painting. The woman sits on the sofa to read a magazine. The thin burglar tries to alert the fat one once, but he doesn't notice. The second time, he finally spots the woman and they both sneak up behind the sofa. She turns off the music and switches on Daniel CC Movie Channel. The homeowner finishes in the bathroom, and though clearly having issues with each other, the couple ignore one another and also sit down on the sofa. Soon, the two begin fighting over the remote control, their long-standing feud boiling over. Finally, the homeowner grabs the remote, turns off the TV, removes the batteries, and drops them into the woman's glass of water. The woman steps outside to get some air, with the homeowner closely following her. While they argue by the pool, the two burglars seize the opportunity to make their move on the painting. The fat burglar stands guard as the thin one swiftly removes the painting, replacing it with a crude replica made from tin foil and kitchen paper. Just as they're finishing, the woman returns to the house and unknowingly steps on the real painting. The housemaid then comes in to tidy up, mistaking the real painting on the floor as dirty laundry and taking it away to be washed. As the woman leaves, she glances at the fake painting but doesn't notice anything unusual. The fat burglar follows the maid to the laundry room in search of the painting. Meanwhile, the blonde woman heads upstairs and the washing machine has already started. The fat burglar, at a loss on how to stop it, is sprayed with a mist cleaner by the maid, who then runs out of the room. The thin burglar intercepts her and knocks her out with chloroform. Arriving in the laundry room, he's informed by his partner that the painting is in the washing machine. As they fret over how to retrieve it, the machine's final chime catches their attention. The maid had placed the painting inside a storage bin, and with a sigh of relief, they watch as the conveyor belt moves it upstairs. The thin burglar rushes up to the bedroom and sees the woman packing her suitcase, with the painting now in her luggage. She then enters the bathroom, leaving her clothes on the floor, prompting the burglar to search for the keys to unlock the suitcase. While searching, he's stunned to witness an unexpected transformation. The woman changes her appearance into a man so quickly that he's left speechless. Meanwhile, downstairs, the homeowner retrieves a gun from a drawer, just missing the fat burglar, who stumbles into the kitchen, searching for something to soothe his irritated eyes. He grabs a cucumber, but it turns out to be a chili pepper, making things even worse. While music plays throughout the house, the homeowner, who's contemplating ending it all, is unaware of the chaotic burglar fumbling around. With a sense of resignation, he places the gun in his mouth. Upstairs, the woman emerges from the bathroom, and the thin burglar hides under the bed. The woman, unable to find her slippers, reaches behind, causing a deflated doll to make a sound, which makes her pause in confusion. Downstairs, after much internal struggle, the homeowner lowers the gun, while the fat burglar finally manages to find the bathroom and wash his eyes. The homeowner, upon returning to the room and seeing the mess, calmly restores order, assuming it's the aftermath of his girlfriend's tantrum. The fat burglar, now able to see, returns to the bathroom where the woman places the keys to her suitcase in her robe pocket. Meanwhile, music starts playing downstairs, and the woman, seemingly at peace, heads down to find the homeowner. The thin burglar, unable to locate the key, has to come up with another plan. When the woman finds the homeowner, he stops her from speaking, and the two begin to dance to some TikTok music. The fat burglar sees the thin burglar signaling for help, and he manages to sneak upstairs. Upstairs, the two burglars work together to lift the suitcase, while downstairs, the couple share an intimate moment on the sofa. As the music reaches its climax, the woman shows a hint of hesitation, but this time the homeowner doesn't pause and fires a gun. He turns off the music, only for the doorbell to ring, forcing the two burglars halfway down the stairs to turn back and carry the suitcase back up. The wealthy homeowner opens the door to find a deaf-mute salesperson selling cleaning supplies. Having just killed someone and needing to clean up the scene, he realizes the supplies could be useful. He asks the salesperson to wait and goes back inside to drag the woman's body, intending to hide her in the closet near the door. When he opens the closet, he finds the housemaid inside. With no time to wonder why she's there, he hurriedly stashes the body in a different spot. Then he pours leftover thick soup over the blood-stained sofa to disguise the stains. After that, he lets the deaf-mute salesperson in to clean. While the salesperson is busy, the homeowner takes the cleaning bags to the laundry room. Meanwhile, the front door is blocked, forcing the thin burglar to go downstairs to find tools. The salesperson, unaware of anything suspicious, tries to sell cleaning products to the burglar. Although they haven't secured the painting yet, they've already incurred expenses. Upstairs, the burglars use the rope they just bought to lower the suitcase from the balcony. Noticing bullet holes in the cushions, the deaf-mute salesperson then spots the suitcase being lowered slowly outside the balcony. At that moment, the homeowner emerges, and the salesperson points out the suitcase, but as the homeowner turns around, the suitcase is quickly pulled back up, forcing him to go outside to investigate. Seeing nothing amiss, he's about to go back inside when he looks up to see the suitcase dangling above him. Startled, the burglars let go, and the suitcase drops, breaking the homeowner's neck. The burglars rush downstairs to check, only to see the contents of the suitcase scattered into the pool, including the valuable painting. Just then, 2 gunshots ring out. The deaf-mute salesperson has finished them off. He then makes a phone call, reporting that the job is complete. As it turns out, the salesperson was also after the painting. However, he doesn't realize that he's taken a fake. The real painting sinks to the bottom of the pool, making all their efforts in vain, leaving only the unconscious maid as the likely survivor. The third story begins with an old English apartment building. Someone is pulling back the curtains. Inside, a man named Tom anxiously watches the street corner. His girlfriend, Jerry, asks him which dress looks scruffier, as she has an audition later and her character needs to look unkempt. Tom asks what the role is, and she replies it's Dorothy in Doomsday. Tom scoffs, saying it sounds terribly dull. She reminds him that she hasn't had work in 5 months, so beggars can't be choosers. Speaking of beggars, Tom asks if she's noticed the strange homeless man on the street. This is exactly what has been bothering Tom. Why would a homeless man beg in a spot where no one can see him? Jerry thinks he's overthinking it, then asks how his work is going. It turns out Tom is a primary school teacher, bored as he stamps encouraging comments on student essays. Jerry reminds him that his feedback is important for the kids and that he shouldn't cut corners. Tom complains that he has too many assignments to grade, prompting her to mock him, saying he clearly has time to spy on the homeless man. With that, Tom gets up to walk Jerry to the subway station. The scene shifts, and it seems Tom is talking to Jerry on the phone. Just then, the intercom buzzes. Someone downstairs says they found Tom's wallet on the street. Suspicious, but still polite, Tom presses the button to let them in. Soon, a disheveled homeless man arrives at his door. Tom opens his wallet, and the homeless man quickly assures him that he hasn't taken anything. Tom awkwardly explains that he's just looking for his dry cleaning receipt. Seeing the man's pitiful state, Tom takes out $40 as a thank you. The man gratefully introduces himself as Mig. At this point, Tom feels there's no need to prolong the interaction, so he closes the door with a vague excuse. Watching Mig walk away, Tom feels a bit embarrassed. After confirming the man has left, he breathes a sigh of relief and returns to the sofa to continue grading. Not long after, there's another knock. Tom checks, and it's the homeless man again. Initially reluctant, Tom opens the door after Mig says he's brought a gift. Embarrassed, Tom pretends he's just finished showering and quickly wets his hair before answering the door. Mig has bought a bottle of wine with the money Tom gave him and sheepishly admits he drank a bit to keep warm in the cold weather. Mig thanks Tom for speaking with him, which seems to touch Tom. Dropping his guard, Tom invites Mig in for a drink. Mig, looking around the apartment, has already settled himself on the sofa by the time Tom brings over the wine glasses. This makes Tom slightly uncomfortable, but he lets it go. They start chatting over drinks, and Mig asks if Tom's job as a teacher is well-paying. Tom says it's decent, but it's not his dream job. Mig then asks what he'd ideally like to do, and Tom mentions he's working on a novel, something along the lines of an English Charles Bukowski. To Tom's surprise, Mig says he actually knew Bukowski. Taken aback, Tom listens as Mig claims he spent a few weeks with Bukowski while he was writing his final book. Given his admiration for Bukowski and the hardships he faced, Tom becomes deeply interested in Mig's story. They drink and chat through the night, with Tom eagerly asking questions like a devoted fan. By the time Tom wakes up the next morning, Jerry has returned home, surprised to find Tom still there instead of at work. When she learns that Tom invited a homeless man in for a drunken night, she is furious. Jerry scolds Tom for bringing the homeless man home, but Tom feels she's being prejudiced. The homeless man has given him valuable advice on his writing, and Tom suggests that if she met him, her opinion would change. Jerry refuses outright and warns Tom to get rid of him immediately. She also tells him to call the school to apologize, saying he needs the job. Annoyed, Tom retorts that at least he still has a job and she has not. Offended, Jerry says she has a job interview lined up and they part on bad terms. Just after Jerry leaves, the homeless man emerges from the bathroom, having taken the liberty of using Tom's shower. Seeing the mess left behind, Tom realizes he's running late. The homeless man advises that going to work smelling like alcohol will only make things worse, suggesting he call in sick. Thinking it over, Tom accepts this advice. The homeless man then asks if Jerry is his roommate, and Tom clarifies that she's his girlfriend. The homeless man says she is the crazy actress. Tom hesitates, wondering why he would say that, and the homeless man replies that's what he called her last night. He then offers to make breakfast, but Tom tells him it's time to leave since he has work to do, and his girlfriend will be back soon. The homeless man isn't offended and casually mentions that drunk Tom had already thrown away his dirty clothes, so Tom will need to lend him something to wear. With no recollection of the previous night, Tom reluctantly agrees and goes to find clothes for him. The homeless man reassures him, saying he'll just make breakfast while he waits. Once again, Tom seems to be swayed and slumps back onto the sofa. The scene shifts and the homeless man is still there. They drink and play chess, and the ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts suggests they've been at it for hours. Eventually, Tom realizes he can't keep this up. He needs to eat, wash up, and prepare for work. When he hears that tomorrow is Saturday, he cheers, only to suddenly remember he hasn't heard from Jerry in a while. He checks his phone and the voicemail on his landline, but finds no messages. The homeless man reminds him they're out of cigarettes, so Tom gets up to buy more. Briefly gone is the timid stranger from before. As Tom steps out to buy cigarettes, the phone rings. It's Stevie, a colleague, calling to check in and chat about school events Tom missed. Meanwhile, the homeless man freely rummages around, even pocketing a set of keys from a drawer, as if he owns the place. As soon as the call ends, he deletes the message. Tom's phone rings next, but the homeless man turns it off and stuffs it deep into the sofa before lying back, fully at ease. A week later, Tom looks disheveled, with stubble covering his face. When Jerry returns from rehearsal, she's shocked to hear that he quit his job. Tom casually admits it, saying that working at the primary school was a waste of time and that now he can fully focus on his writing. Hearing this, Jerry doesn't argue, but goes to open a window to air out the room. Tom complains that she disappeared for a week, only to return and start controlling everything. Surprised, Jerry explains that she left him a message saying she'd be away for a week for rehearsals. Tom claims he lost his phone. Jerry patiently advises him to try to get his job back at the school, but Tom has no interest, saying the homeless man has already helped him fill out unemployment paperwork. Hearing this, Jerry warns him that the man is using him, but Tom snaps back, accusing her of being jealous and saying she's mad he's copying her moves, like crashing at his place and borrowing some of his cash. Offended, Jerry storms out. Tom's life continues to decline. He no longer cleans, and his apartment is a chaotic mess, with his appearance resembling that of a homeless man. He checks his voicemails, but finds nothing. Afterward, he begins speaking nonsensically to his answering machine. Tom has run through his savings and now pins his hopes on unemployment benefits. But so far, there's been no word, leaving him deeply frustrated. Meanwhile, the homeless man, looking cleaner than ever, suggests Tom wash some dishes to earn money. Annoyed, Tom snaps, asking who's in charge, reminding the man how filthy he was when he first arrived. With that, Tom storms out of the room. After he leaves, the homeless man retrieves a stack of hidden letters, including a birthday card from Tom's grandmother. The scene shifts, and we see Tom waking up wrapped in a blanket on the sofa when the doorbell rings. He struggles to get up and answers the door. It's his co-worker, Stevie. Shocked by the cluttered state of the apartment, Stevie asks if Tom is okay and hands him a gift from colleagues who pooled together to support him. Stevie notices Tom's disappointment and gently asks if he'd rather have cash. Tom says it's fine and reassures Stevie that he'll be okay once his unemployment benefits come through, and Mig once told him he would be in even better shape by then. Stevie, puzzled, asks who this Mig is, and Tom vaguely replies Mig is just a friend. Stevie invites him out for a meal, but Tom firmly declines. As he leaves, Stevie tells Tom to reach out if he needs to talk. Tom closes the door and returns to the living room in a daze, where Mig is waiting on the sofa with a can of beer. The scene cuts to the bathroom, where Tom, looking at his unkempt reflection in the mirror, hears strange noises from the other room. He searches for the source, only to find the voicemail light blinking. It's a message from the power company, saying his bill is seriously overdue, and they'll soon cut off his electricity. Just as the call ends, the power goes out, and Tom breaks down in tears. At that moment, Mig, now neatly dressed, walks in, and Tom demands to know why his benefits haven't arrived. Mig says it probably needs more time for approval, adding that he might even rent the apartment himself now that he has a well-paying job. As he says this, he tosses 50 at Tom, then heads to the bathroom when he hears the faucet running. Jerry comes in through the front door, and Tom pitifully tells her his power was cut off and everything is spiraling out of control. She tries to reassure him, saying that if his benefits come through, he'll have peace of mind to focus on writing. But she interrupts his daydreams, pointing out that Mig doesn't exist. He's just a figment of Tom's imagination. Tom refuses to believe her bullshit, taking her to the bathroom, but it's empty. She gently tells him he's been depressed for a long time and that he created Mig as an excuse to avoid facing his problems. Tom tries to argue, but she tells him she has to go back to rehearsal. Before leaving, she urges him to get Mig out of his head and move on with his life. She leaves, closing the bathroom door, revealing Mig hiding behind it. The scene shifts again, and Tom's apartment is back to its tidy state. Jerry is telling Tom about a line she messed up during her performance, and he looks clean-shaven and cheerful, listening as she animatedly talks. Then the doorbell rings. It's Stevie from before. Stevie is thrilled to see Tom getting his life back on track and encourages him to consider returning to the school. Tom says he'll think about it. He then calls out to his girlfriend, telling her that Stevie is here. Stevie, looking uncomfortable, reminds Tom that Jerry died in a car accident. Tom thinks this is absurd, insisting he just spoke to her, but Stevie gently suggests it's time for him to let go. Tom is confused. After all, it was his girlfriend who told him to get rid of Mig. Realizing Tom's delusions, Stevie goes to the bathroom to get his medication. Upon entering, Stevie is horrified to see a man drowned in the bathtub. Tom, unfazed, calmly says, "That's Mig who never existed." With that, he leaves the room and the story ends. In this story, Tom and Jerry are a couple. Tom is a primary school teacher and Jerry is a stage actress. About 5 months before the story begins, they had an argument, possibly related to work, and soon after, Jerry was involved in a car accident. This incident left Tom emotionally shattered, and he developed mental health issues that he managed with medication. Tom's co-workers were aware of his struggles, but they thought he'd recovered when he returned to work. However, what no one realized was that Tom's condition was slowly worsening. He began exhibiting symptoms of schizophrenia, as shown in the opening scene where he imagines conversations with his deceased girlfriend. Then Mig, the homeless man, appears, further destabilizing Tom's mental state. Mig likely observed Tom's life for some time, noticing his mental vulnerability, and decided to take advantage, slowly trying to replace him. Whether Tom lost his wallet by accident or Mig stole it only to later return it as a pretense is unclear, but both are possible. At that moment, Tom, already mentally fragile, fell under Mig's influence. Initially, abandoning his responsibilities and living recklessly gave Tom's stressed mind some relief, but his chaotic lifestyle and excessive drinking soon made things worse. His imagined conversations with his deceased girlfriend urging him to remove Mig were his subconscious trying to protect him. In the end, he follows this advice, telling himself that he needs to erase Mig from his mind. But the truth is, his breakdown wasn't just from dissatisfaction with his past life, it stemmed from his inability to cope with Jerry's death after their argument. This traumatic memory was something he subconsciously erased, ultimately leading to him killing Mig while pretending that Jerry was still part of his life. Now let's examine the details related to each character. Tom is dissatisfied with his job as a primary school teacher and dreams of becoming a writer. After his girlfriend's accidental death, Tom's self-defense mechanisms kick in, and he grows increasingly averse to his previous life. From the story, it's clear that Tom models his writing style after Charles Bukowski, a writer whose works often focus on the struggles of society's marginalized. This explains why Tom is so drawn to observing the homeless man and why he's open to allowing him to stay and engage with him. The underlying reason is that Tom wants to escape reality, seeking to immerse himself in a different kind of life. From the start of the story, his girlfriend Jerry is already dead. All of Tom's conversations with her are simply his own internal monologue. This conclusion is based on Stevie's statement at the end, revealing that Tom hadn't been back to work at all. When Stevie refers to Tom's absence, he's talking about before the story even begins. Tom had worked at the school, so initially we see him grading papers. Then, at the end of the first scene, he offers to accompany his girlfriend to the subway station, saying he needs to buy milk. It's likely that during this time, he either lost his wallet or it was stolen, catching the attention of Mig, who saw an opportunity to take advantage of Tom's eccentric and seemingly delusional behavior. Tom and Jerry might have had an argument before her accident, which Tom never truly got over. This is inferred from their imagined argument, where Jerry criticizes him for quitting his job and letting Mig take advantage of him. Tom's sarcastic retort that she's jealous of Mig for stealing her tactics implies that his girlfriend was out of work, had financial struggles, and might have asked Tom for help. However, she wasn't supportive of his writing ambitions, leading to tension and a quarrel. After they parted on bad terms, she died in a car accident, which led to Tom's mental breakdown. As for Mig, he's a real person, as evidenced by Stevie's discovery of his body in the bathtub at the end. Mig was observant and shrewd, quickly picking up on Tom's interests when they first met. Cunning and manipulative, he gradually gained control over Tom's life, using tricks like deleting voicemails, hiding the phone, and stealing letters to make Tom feel abandoned by the world. Ultimately, his goal was to replace Tom, but he underestimated Tom's deteriorating mental state, which ultimately led to Mig's death at the hands of a mentally unstable Tom. The fourth story begins on an early morning as preparations are underway at house number 9. Today is little girl Tamsin's birthday, and a celebrity will be visiting the house to meet her. Tamsin's father, Graham, is busy blowing up balloons, while her mother, Jane, still hasn't figured out how to use the video camera. She asks her husband for help. Jane then heads to her daughter's room. The young girl is gravely ill and doesn't seem excited. Jane instructs her to record a video later, reminding her to say what day it is and who will be visiting. The girl doesn't understand why this is necessary, but her mother insists that in this way she won't forget such an important day. Jane begins recording, though it's clear she hasn't quite figured out how to use the camera as the footage is choppy. In the living room, Graham is still struggling with the balloons. Jane scolds him, saying he should have prepared them the night before. Just then, the doorbell rings. It must be the celebrity. Jane rushes to tidy up in Tamsin's room while her husband lets their guest in. The man at the door is Frankie, the celebrity. Jane's face lights up with excitement upon seeing her idol. Behind Frankie stands Sally, the organizer of the Make-A-Wish event, and beside her is Frankie's bodyguard. Frankie asks to meet the birthday girl. Finally, they all make their way to Tamsin's room. Jane hovers nearby, eager to capture the moment on camera, and Frankie graciously plays along, even offering to step out and re-enter to make sure they get the footage right. So, Frankie enthusiastically does a second take, though Jane still hasn't figured out the camera. Thinking the recording is complete, she sets the camera aside, unknowingly pressing the actual record button this time. When Frankie struggles with the balloons, Jane rushes off to grab an air pump. Frankie's almost finished inflating the last one, and just as expected, something goes wrong. His final breath in the balloon leads him to collapse from an apparent medical issue, and the entire incident is captured on film. Hearing the girl scream, everyone realizes that something has gone terribly wrong. In the next scene, Jane is still in shock from her idol's sudden death. Graham, trying to host, brings tea to the guests. Sally asks for some sugar, but Graham, clueless about where anything is kept, ends up needing his wife's help. As they talk, he subtly asks for a signed CD. Sally catches on quickly, reassuring him that they have plenty of autographed items and can arrange to send one over. The bodyguard comes to inform them that Frankie's manager is on the way and has instructed that no one is to touch anything before he arrives. Sally asks why they can't just call the police, and the bodyguard explains that doing so would attract a swarm of reporters. Jane returns with a packet of sugar, while her daughter Tamsin sobs quietly in a corner. Seeing the child's distress, Jane goes over to comfort her. Observing the scene, Graham's mind starts racing with ideas. The bodyguard seems to sense this and approaches, requesting the balloon Tamsin is holding. Graham tries to downplay the significance of the balloon, but the bodyguard isn't easily fooled, pointing out that the balloon is filled with Frankie's final breaths. Reluctantly, Tamsin hands the balloon to the bodyguard, and Graham offers to tie it securely. Then, he instructs his wife to fetch the laptop. At this point, Sally's boss calls. Sally doesn't disclose the real situation, saying instead that Frankie wants to stay longer to sing with the little girl. Meanwhile, Graham and the bodyguard sing along to keep up the charade. Sally successfully convinces her boss, and Graham hands her the balloon for safekeeping. He then looks up celebrity memorabilia prices online, his excitement growing with each estimate. Justin Bieber's hair sold for $40,000, Elvis Presley's hair for $120,000, and Michael Jackson's glove for $400,000. Jane finally understands what Graham is up to. He wants to auction off the balloon for a hefty sum. Sally supports the idea, pointing out that they could add extra value by mentioning the unique circumstances. Graham quickly insists that the balloon belongs to his daughter, reiterating their ownership and that it was her wish. Tamsin glances around at the eager faces, then turns to look at the lifeless body lying on the floor. The scene shifts as the group decides to play one of Frankie's classic songs to lighten the mood. After some debate, they settle on one of his most iconic tracks. Immersed in the song, they listen in silence. Before long, Graham switches off the music, announcing that he's gathered some promising estimates from auction houses. Noticing Tamsin nearby, Graham instructs his wife to take her outside. Jane guides the girl out, lamenting that what was supposed to be an unforgettable moment has turned into a nightmare. Meanwhile, Graham's voice echoes from inside, filled with pride and ambition. Feeling guilty, Tamsin whispers that it was her fault for asking Frankie to blow up the balloon. Her mother reassures her. Back inside, Graham and the others have already started arguing over how to split the potential windfall. Graham insists on a larger share, and tensions rise. Unable to come to an agreement, Graham finally grabs the balloon, threatening to pop it and end the argument. Jane stops him, urging him to give the birthday balloon back to their daughter. As Graham hands it to Tamsin, he reminds her to guard it carefully and promises to take her to Disneyland. Graham then suggests everyone sit down to eat and discuss. The scene shifts to Jane and Sally preparing food in the kitchen. Curious, Jane asks Sally about the most beautiful wish she's helped fulfill in her career. Sally thinks the question is silly but recalls a memorable task, a terminally ill little girl who simply wanted to be a mail carrier. Unfortunately, no media outlets were interested in covering the story, so her boss assigned it to Sally. When they handed the girl some letters to deliver, she was ecstatic, even though she passed away right on the doorstep afterward. Sally proudly recalls how the media frenzy erupted after that, savoring the unexpected twist to the story. Meanwhile, Graham and the bodyguard are busy photographing the balloon, hoping to document its last breath value. The bodyguard receives an update that the manager will arrive in 20 minutes. Naturally, they intend to keep the arrangement under wraps. Graham and the bodyguard chat, and it turns out Frankie had complained about having to come here, as he felt it wasn't his job. Hearing a noise, the group rushes to check on the balloon, relieved to find it intact, but reminded to place it somewhere secure. Upon obtaining the balloon, Graham prepares to place it upstairs. The bodyguard doesn't trust him and decides to go along. Carefully, the two lay the balloon on the bed, covering it with blankets before heading back downstairs. Jane suggests that Graham blow up another balloon for their daughter as a consolation. Seeing the two remaining purple balloons, the three of them get another idea and decide to fake more last breaths. Just as Jane returns with the pump, she's shocked to see Frankie coming to life, leaving the group frozen in place. Graham instructs Jane to take their daughter out of the room. The girl resists, but Jane follows Graham's order. The bodyguard checks on Frankie, who is barely alive, with a faint pulse. The ambulance is 5 minutes away. Graham consoles himself, thinking that even if the balloon isn't filled with his last breath, it'll still fetch a decent price. Knowing what the bodyguard implies, Graham hesitates to act. Sally, however, firmly declares that she will fulfill her own wish this time. The bodyguard flips a coin for Graham to decide who should finish the job. In the end, the task falls to the bodyguard. As he closes the door, Sally doesn't forget to hand him one of the extra balloons, instructing him to soak up some of Frankie's DNA. Horrified, Graham watches the events unfolding in his home, clenching his teeth as he shuts his eyes. 5 minutes later, the manager arrives and takes the deceased Frankie away. Before leaving, the bodyguard warns them that the media will arrive shortly, so they should brace themselves. Sally suggests reviewing the recording one more time so they can edit and distribute clips to various TV stations. Jane suddenly realizes that her daughter is still alone in her room and rushes back to find that she's no longer in her wheelchair or in her room. She steps outside to ask her husband, and at that moment, they spot their daughter. In her bedroom, the girl releases the balloon containing Frankie's final breath, watching it float into the distant sky as Frankie's song plays in the background, ending the story. The fifth story begins in the theater, where Shakespeare's famous tragedy Macbeth was being performed. Following the staff, we arrived at dressing room number 9. The performance ended, and a famous actor, Tony, who played the lead role of Macbeth, returned backstage. The costume designer, Kirsty, skillfully helped him change out of his costume, and Tony complained about his ill-fitting shoes. At that moment, a broadcast announced a visitor asking to see Tony. Annoyed, Tony cursed that he just finished a 3-hour performance, and now he didn't want to deal with fans. He then instructed Kirsty to bring the fan over, reminding them to come back in 5 minutes with an excuse to help him get away. Just then, the understudy actor, Jim, came in to say hello and praised the evening's performance. Jim invited Tony to watch the understudy's performance on Friday. Tony replied he had a dubbing job at 2 p.m. that day. Tony then grumbled that the visitors were his neighbors, a married couple. Despite his complaints, Tony's acting skills were impressive. He greeted the neighbors warmly as soon as he saw them and exchanged a few casual words. Tony signaled to Kirsty, but the woman didn't seem to understand and instead asked if they wanted something to drink. Tony quickly explained he had quit drinking a long time ago. Turning away, he motioned to his assistant to check the time. The assistant reminded him that he had a dubbing session early tomorrow morning. The woman's awkward excuse irritated Tony, and just as he was about to argue, Jim interjected, wanting to confirm that his dubbing session was on Friday. Left without an excuse, Tony reluctantly followed the couple to dinner. The dressing room was left with only Jim. He approached the mirror, took a sip from Tony's drink, and placed the Macbeth crown on his head. Ambition flashed in his eyes. Meanwhile, Jim's girlfriend Laura was practicing her lines for the understudy's performance. Laura, also an understudy in the play, corrected Jim's phrasing in detail. Jim grew impatient, but Laura continued to critique him. He gave up practicing. At that moment, the theater manager opened the door. Seeing them in the lead actor's dressing room, she demanded to know who let them in here, saying that unauthorized access to this dressing room could get them fired. Jim claimed the costume designer, Kirsty, allowed them to stay there. The manager didn't press further but reminded them that the understudy's performance was starting in 15 minutes. She added that they wouldn't get the lead actor's treatment. Everything is kept simple. She then noticed Laura drinking takeout coffee and questioned Jim for failing to sign the entry and exit log. Using fire safety regulations as an excuse, she urged Jim to head backstage and sign the log immediately. Jim complied. As soon as Jim left, the manager closed the door and said to Laura that Lady Macbeth's costume was still being ironed, so she told her to take off her smelly pants and shirt now to save time. Laura refused to comply. Fortunately, Jim returned just in time. Before leaving, the manager reminded them to perform quickly and not delay the evening's main show. After the manager left, the two vented their frustration toward her. Laura expressed her anger, and when Jim saw the payment envelope, his dissatisfaction grew even stronger. Jim tried to console them both by saying that after all, they were not doing this for the money. They did it because they loved performing. Laura retorted that they were actually doing it for the money. It turned out the two were planning to get married in 6 months. At that moment, Kirsty walked in. Laura seized the opportunity to ask her if she knew how much Tony was being paid. Without hesitation, Kirsty opened Tony's payroll statement, revealing a stark disparity. Laura immediately suggested if Jim replaced him, how much could Jim earn? As she spoke, she accidentally pricked her finger on a needle embedded in the costume. Kirsty explained that she was about to sew the garment and offered to get a bandage for her. Both of them stared at Laura's pricked finger, and she began reciting lines from the play. At that moment, the broadcast announced it was time for them to go on stage. As Jim was about to leave, he noticed drops of Laura's blood on the floor. The blood slowly spread, and terrifying images began to form in his mind. Snapping out of it, he realized the bloodstains had vanished. On stage, other actors continued the performance. Meanwhile, a drunken Tony was helped back into the dressing room by Kirsty. The manager stormed in, furious, demanding to know why Tony had just vomited on stage. It turned out Tony had been drinking a lot of vodka. The manager ordered Kirsty to call the understudy actor. She threw Tony into the bathtub and gave him 5 minutes to get back to his senses. Faced with this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Jim hesitated. The manager declared if Tony didn't sober up, Jim would have to replace him and finish the show. Laura arrived and urged Jim to change into the costume and get ready. The manager temporarily left, telling Kirsty to pull Tony out of the bathtub in 2 minutes and reevaluate his condition. Jim still seemed unable to convince himself to step onto the stage. Laura encouraged him repeatedly, handing him the prop sword on the table and urging him to seize the opportunity. Just then, terrifying visions reappeared in Jim's mind. At that moment, Tony stumbled out of the bathtub, slightly sobered up. Jim immediately backed out, saying if Tony felt better, then let him go on. Tony, full of swagger, headed toward the stage. Seeing Jim lose the opportunity, Laura was furious. She snapped that Tony's had so much to drink, but Jim replied he's just an understudy, he couldn't change his situation. The two parted on bad terms. Thoroughly disappointed, Laura took off her engagement ring. At that moment, there was a noise from the bathroom. She went to investigate but found nothing. Suddenly, the sound of Tony falling came from the stage. The opportunity returned. Laura put the ring back on. After this incident, Jim, now dressed as Macbeth, had successfully replaced Tony as the lead actor. Kirsty now worked exclusively for him, and Laura presented him with a gift. Laura entered the dressing room. Before leaving, Kirsty was instructed by Jim to prepare the same fruit drink she used to make for Tony. It had been a while since Laura had seen Jim. She came to wish him good luck, saying he finally made it. Speaking of Tony, Laura asked how he was doing. Jim revealed that Tony had broken his leg after drunkenly falling on stage that night. He was still in the hospital. Jim added that it could have been worse. Thankfully, he fell onto the gargoyle prop. Laura jokingly asked if the manager wasn't on stage at the time. Jim, unamused, said that's not funny and proposed not to talk about it. It turned out the manager had been fired after she was accused of sexual harassment. Laura insisted she never shared those allegations publicly, but Jim replied that's the exact reason she was dismissed. Changing the subject, Laura suggested that Jim join her for dinner with her sister. Jim refused, saying she would feel awkward eating with regular people. At that moment, the broadcast announced the show would start in 30 minutes. Understanding the situation, Laura turned away, visibly disappointed, and left. Jim stood alone, preparing to go on stage, placing the crown on his head. Behind him, a faint whispering sound came from the broadcast. Eerie visions resurfaced once again. Now, Jim had become a renowned stage actor. Today's performance was Shakespeare's Richard III. While signing autographs for fans, he took a phone call. Looking at the newly renovated dressing room, he realized it had been a long time since he last visited this place. His assistant reminded him that a disabled fan hoped to meet him before the performance. Jim asked why they couldn't wait until after the show, and he didn't like backstage visits during intermissions. The assistant explained there wouldn't be time to meet after the show. Finally, Jim agreed to the meeting, but instructed the assistant to return in 5 minutes with an excuse to send the person away. This approach mirrored Tony's old ways. Jim practiced his lines in front of the mirror. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind him. The disabled fan who wanted to meet him was none other than Tony, now confined to a wheelchair. Jim was surprised, and Tony remarked that it had been nearly 2 years since they last met. After exchanging pleasantries and asking about each other's lives, the conversation stalled. Jim awkwardly tried to find a topic. Tony asked if Jim and Laura had married. Jim denied it, explaining they were no longer together and they had broken up long ago. After a brief silence, Jim mentioned he needed to prepare for the performance. Tony understood what that meant, encouraging him to keep up his excellent work and saying he was performing for the both of them now. With that, Tony called for his caregiver. The caregiver turned out to be Kirsty, the former costume designer, now working full-time to care for Tony. Kirsty mentioned that since their separation, she had watched every one of Jim's performances. She said she always knew he'd become famous. All he just needed was a push. Jim didn't quite understand what she meant. Kirsty continued, saying Laura really caused a mess here back then. Confused, Jim asked what she was talking about. Kirsty explained that Laura had committed suicide here. She had slit her wrists in the bathroom and the blood had spread everywhere, soaking into the floors. That was why the room had to be renovated. Jim was shocked and couldn't believe it. He stammered that he had no idea. Kirsty replied, of course he didn't, since he had already left by then. Jim speculated that he might have been busy filming Game of Thrones at the time. The broadcast announced that the show was about to start. Kirsty helped Jim into his costume, apologizing for bringing up something that might affect his performance. But Jim adjusted quickly, saying he understood why Laura had killed herself. She was the one who caused Tony's accident, and she couldn't handle the guilt. Hearing this, Kirsty corrected him that wasn't Laura's doing because she herself was the one who spiked Tony's drink with hard liquor. She continued, explaining that the former theater manager had constantly held Jim back, never giving him a chance to go on stage. So she accused the manager of harassing her, causing her to be fired easily. Shocked, Jim asked why she would make up such a lie. Kirsty replied she did it all for him since she had seen too many geniuses buried in obscurity. Jim was speechless, stunned by her confession. Kirsty finished helping him dress and before leaving said caring for Tony was her penance for what she had done. But Laura's death, that's Jim's price to pay. Jim protested, saying Laura's death had nothing to do with him. Kirsty agreed, but she knew Jim made it clear to Laura that his career had to come first. Finally, she revealed the engagement ring she had taken from Laura's hand, saying she had been waiting by his side all along, just like an understudy. After Kirsty left, Jim began to feel dizzy, visions of horrifying images flooding his mind. His assistant's voice snapped him back to reality, and Jim headed to the stage to perform. With that, the story ended. This story reveals that it was Kirsty who secretly tampered with Tony's drink by spiking it with liquor, causing his fall from the stage and permanent injury. She also removed the theater manager, who had doubted Jim's potential, clearing the way for Jim. At first glance, Jim seems neither as ambitious nor ruthless. He doesn't murder or conspire directly, and Laura only encourages him verbally, without committing any actions herself. But is this really the case? Tony's fall from the stage, resulting in his permanent disability, appears to be caused by Kirsty spiking his drink. In another scene, Laura handed Jim a sword, encouraging him to seize his opportunity to take the stage. At that moment, Jim saw visions again. The visions symbolize ambition, guilt, and a looming sense of wrongdoing. Jim's expression during this moment is not one of rejection, but of deep consideration. He even extended his hand toward the sword. This suggests that Jim may not be as innocent as he seems. After running out of the dressing room, his actions remain unaccounted for. After replacing Tony, Jim began to distance himself from Laura. While it appears that Jim was discontent with Laura's behavior or suspected her involvement in Tony's accident, the truth might be darker. It could be that Jim, now elevated, felt Laura no longer matched his status. Alternatively, he may have wanted to hide his darker side from her. Perhaps Jim didn't want Laura to uncover what he had done. When Kirsty revealed that Laura had committed suicide, Jim appeared shocked. He quickly brought up his role in Game of Thrones, casually suggesting that Laura's guilt over Tony's accident must have driven her to take her life. But when Kirsty confessed that she was the one who spiked Tony's drink, Jim was visibly stunned. To the audience, this revelation might seem like Jim's realization that his treatment of Laura indirectly led to her death. What if Jim killed Laura? Perhaps Laura discovered Jim's true nature. Perhaps she suspected him of tampering with Tony's drink. Even if Tony's accident wasn't Jim's doing, Laura's death might still be tied to Jim. In the final moments, Jim denied any involvement in Laura's death. But Kirsty remarked that his career must always come first. This strongly implies that Jim may have feared Laura would expose the truth about Tony's accident, jeopardizing his career, and thus decided to silence her. Laura, then, was an obstacle to Jim's ambition. The flashbacks at the end, far from being temporary visions, might be Jim's memories of his own murder. The sixth story begins with a nightfall when a gloomy, desolate villa stood against the dim twilight. Inside, the lady of the house was preparing food, a bottle of milk, a biscuit, and a pair of pliers. At the same time, Katie, an art student, was on her way to the villa. She chatted with a friend on the phone, sharing details with her friend about her job for the evening. No sooner had she finished speaking than the signal abruptly cut off. Coincidentally, she had just arrived at her destination. After confirming the address, Katie rang the doorbell. Miss Tabitha greeted her and welcomed her inside. The dimly lit atmosphere of the villa made Katie a little uneasy. Tabitha advised Katie to put on her coat, explaining that the house needed to be kept at a constant temperature of -3 degrees Celsius due to her elder brother's health condition. As they talked, Tabitha led Katie into the grand hall of the villa. Being an art student, Katie was immediately drawn to the many paintings adorning the walls. Tabitha explained that most of the artworks depicted scenes of torment in hell and contradicted biblical teachings. She elaborated on a legend stating that Jesus descended into hell, freed the prisoners, and released Adam, Eve, and all the Old Testament saints. She added that this was mentioned in the Apocrypha. Next, Tabitha proudly pointed to a 14th century painting, asking Katie if she recognized it. Katie admitted she didn't, and mentioned that her teacher considered the Renaissance the biggest dead end in the history of art. Noticing Katie's apparent lack of appreciation for the paintings, Tabitha sneered, mocking Katie's artistic taste. She added that Katie was still too young to need solace from such works. Tabitha then reached out as if to stroke Katie's hair, but Katie felt nothing unusual. Turning around, Katie noticed a mechanical chairlift beside the staircase. Tabitha explained that it belonged to her other brother, Hector. She clarified that Hector wasn't disabled, just incredibly lazy. Tabitha recounted how in 1998, Hector had started complaining about knee pain from climbing the stairs. 3 days later, he installed the chairlift. She remarked that he always liked to tinker with strange gadgets, before complaining that Hector had installed a garbage disposal in the sink but refused to take her to Florence. After venting, she led Katie to the kitchen. She remarked that living here felt like living in a tomb. Katie seemed confused by the comment, so Miss Tabitha changed the subject. She mentioned that Katie had been recommended by a friend from church and expressed her delight at finding someone so talented. As they spoke, the sound of the chairlift activating interrupted them. Tabitha explained it was Hector coming downstairs and told Katie not to worry. Finally, she outlined Katie's responsibilities for the evening. Tabitha and Hector would be attending a banquet. Though they rarely left the house, this event was unavoidable. Katie curiously asked why their eldest brother wasn't joining them. Tabitha explained that he was severely disabled. Katie's only task was to watch the house. There was no need to care for their eldest brother. He would stay in the top-floor room on his own. At that moment, Hector entered the kitchen. Like his sister, he was extremely pale. He explained to Katie that there was no phone signal in the area, but he showed her the landline phone and instructed her to use it only if absolutely necessary. He reassured her there shouldn't be any issues, but if something does happen, call the number on this note and they would be back by 2 a.m. Lastly, Hector warned her that the phone was on a shared line. If someone else is using it, don't eavesdrop. Before leaving, Tabitha showed Katie where the food was stored. Katie was puzzled to see an entire wall lined with milk powder. Tabitha explained, all of this is for their elder brother since milk and biscuits are the only things he can consume. She added that it's because he's disabled and because he doesn't have a mouth. The siblings also pointed out a bell by their elder brother's bed. Although he had never used it, they advised Katie to listen for it just in case. After they left, Katie began exploring the villa. She wandered into the sitting room where she noticed a sleeping cat curled up on the sofa. Reaching out to pet it, she realized it was stiff, a taxidermy specimen, not a living cat. At that time, Katie noticed a childhood photo of the 3 siblings on the table. She remarked that their elder brother didn't look disabled at all. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Katie's friend Shell, a punk-styled girl. Shell, upon entering, couldn't help but comment on how creepy the paintings were. Unlike Katie, Shell seemed fascinated by the artwork. Katie wanted to show Shell the taxidermy cat, but Shell was too curious, touching everything in sight. As the chairlift moved upstairs, Katie tried to stop it, only to find Shell had wandered off with her chubby body. She hurriedly searched for her friend. They both ended up back in the sitting room, looking for the taxidermy cat they'd seen earlier, only to find it missing. As they talked, a shadow suddenly darted across the sofa. Katie was bewildered. She had thought the cat was a stiff taxidermy specimen, but now it seemed lively. Frightened, Katie decided to call her father. However, the shared line landline was already in use. Katie resolved to leave the villa immediately. At that moment, the chairlift activated again. Just as they were about to leave, the bell upstairs rang. Katie was too scared to investigate, but Shell felt it wouldn't be right to ignore a bedridden patient. Mustered by courage, the 2 girls decided to head upstairs. Shell joked that the girl in the paintings, if dressed in a school uniform, would look just like Katie. Katie was in no mood for jokes. They soon reached the top floor. Katie discovered a bedroom, its walls covered with disturbing devil-themed artwork. Katie was horrified while Shell seemed indifferent, excitedly picking up a guitar by the bed. Katie told her to put it down, saying that's Hector's. Before leaving, they noticed the bed surrounded by a circle. They didn't have time to figure it out as the bell rang again. This time, they followed the sound to a specific room. Inside was an unbearable stench. The bed was shrouded in white cloth, with only a life-monitoring machine beeping eerily in the background. Katie called out to the man, but no one responded. Pulling back the curtain, they were horrified to see a gaunt man tied to the bed. Seeing his tortured state, Katie decided to untie him. But when Shell lifted the blanket, the man's grotesque split toes stunned them both. Katie removed the cloth from his mouth, and he begged them to free him. Katie immediately wanted to help him escape. Shell, however, stopped her, pointing out that if he was tied up, how could he have rung the bell? Just then, the bell rang again. It was the strange siblings. It turns out they had never actually left. Katie threatened to call the police, only to remember there was no phone signal. The siblings explained that their brother Andras had once defied God, causing all sufferings. Just as Lucifer is frozen in ice, their demonic brother is kept in a chamber of ice. Katie dismissed their story as nonsense. The siblings continued, claiming their elder brother had been possessed by a demon when he was 10. It's the demon of mischief. Hector finally revealed their true purpose. For nearly half a century, they had kept Andras confined in this room, preventing the demon from roaming the world. He further explained that every host dies eventually, and when their brother dies, the demon will be freed, and that's where Katie comes in. She will be the next host for the next 50 years. Shell chimed in, excitedly telling Katie they were maintaining world order. She smugly revealed that the previously specimen cat had been switched with a live one while Katie wasn't looking. Katie, furious, dismissed them all as insane and moved to free Andras, whom she saw as just a terrified old man bound to a bed for 50 years. Hector pulled out a taser, threatening Katie. Meanwhile, Tabitha instructed Shell to prepare sedatives. Katie demanded proof that the man on the bed was a demon. Hector pointed out his split toes. Katie scoffed, saying her mom had toes like that. It's just hardened skin. She demanded to know what they were planning to do to her. Hector replied, the process was no different from childbirth, only in reverse. Before he could continue, Katie seized the guitar and smashed it into him. The taser discharged, accidentally shocking his sister. Katie dashed toward the door, but it was locked. Shell followed her, saying Katie's sacrifice would save the world from chaos. Katie shot back, asking why they didn't let the demon possess her. Shell admitted she wanted to, but they said her will was too weak, though she thought it's because she was too fat. Shell then injected Katie with a sedative. When Katie awoke, she was bound to a chair. Andras, the gaunt elder brother, was enjoying his last supper. The siblings wanted Katie to savor her final moments of peace and left the room one by one. Katie was alone, and Andras slowly approached, his skeletal frame looming closer. The story ends here. Much like the House of Usher, this eerie story is a physical manifestation of the Tabitha siblings' fractured psyche. The house is filled with anti-biblical art, hinting that the siblings don't aim to seal away a demon, but rather to worship one. Similar to the Ushers, the siblings are a single lineage family with fatal flaws in their genes. Their eldest brother, Andras, was frail, perhaps showing symptoms of his illness at age 10. As he aged, his condition worsened, causing his body to decay grotesquely. Meanwhile, Hector and his sister suffered mental instability. Their prolonged isolation in the grim villa, their aversion to sunlight, and their pale complexions reflect their declining mental health. Their familial bond became twisted, with hints in the story suggesting they behaved more like a couple. Their obsession with preserving their demonic legacy led them to choose an heir for the family, the art student Katie. Shell, Katie's friend, was likely a previous candidate but failed to meet their standards. Ultimately, their idea of demonic possession was likely about ensuring the continuation of the siblings' bloodline. As for the pliers shown in the beginning, they were probably used to break Andras's toes, forcing him into compliance. Perhaps Andras agreed to their insane plan in exchange for his freedom. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.